So, Mr. Judge provided us with a rendition of the Gita that's very poetical, and we're going to be using it for the next number of minutes to reference the section of the Bhagavad Gita that comes near the end of chapter 2, that by many students is called the self-governed sage. It is one of the finest portraits of the sage that humanity has, and hence why we wanted to put some extra time into it. What we'll be doing is we'll be reading out passage by passage, and various students from around the world are going to spend a few minutes elaborating on those passages. And the whole dialogue in this part of the Gita begins with a question from Arjuna when he asks, "What, O Keshava, is the description of that wise and devoted man who is fixed in contemplation and confirmed in spiritual knowledge? What may such a sage declare? Where may he dwell? Does he move and act like other men?"
Krishna is speaking. A man is said to be confirmed in spiritual knowledge when he forsaketh every desire which entereth into his heart, and of himself is happy and content in the self through the self. When a student asked Mr. Crosby once if one could convey the truth to another, Mr. Crosby's reply was simply, "We can only help another to see the truth within himself." Thus, our teachings encourage each to accept no external authority, rather to seek the only authority, which is the truth of an idea. This, of course, is coupled with one's ability, developed by self-induced means and self-devised methods, to recognize and understand the truth. And we do so as best we can, checked by karma. This we are each individually responsible for. So then what is spiritual knowledge? How does one know when one is confirmed in it? Well, whatever it means, one who is confirmed in spiritual knowledge has to know this for himself. This might be the recognition and acceptance of inherent divinity within oneself and within all of life. Krishna tells us that a sign of confirmation is that every desire which enters the heart is abandoned, is forsaken. Were we in this space of spiritual knowledge then, it seems we might know that the joy and pleasure which comes from the outside world, or which comes from the fulfilling of one's personal desires, must also come with a fair share of pain and loss. It is this distraction we come to abandon. This is what we will have forsaken. But why? Well, we have heard the serenity, the blissful security of spiritual knowledge is entirely beyond the fruits of personal desire. Such true security is not subject to the vicissitudes of this world. Perhaps we have here a small analogy. The analogy is we might experience a certain sample of such bliss in certain ways when we find we can rise against temptation. We at first may feel troubled, or we may feel fear of the future without certain rewards that we've come to know in the past, that we've come to accept. Yet we intuitively know the correctness of overcoming certain temptations. Krishna in this passage may even be talking about overcoming the ultimate temptation. Okay, then what is meant by he of himself can be happy and content in the self, through the self? This is perhaps where self-induced means and self-devised methods comes in. We inherently have the faculties to bring about these internal conditions, which is to say, to be content in the self. The means are at our disposal in our heart and our head. Just where and how to find and use the means is something that no one can decide for another. The means must be discovered or unveiled within the self by our own self-devised methods. All this we find coming about as we continue to follow the law of the self within our own nature. By living according to the law of the self, which is to say, by living through the self, through the law of the self, we may find the happiness, the contentment. We may even finally find ourselves confirmed in spiritual knowledge. Thank you.
His mind is undisturbed in adversity. He is happy and contented in prosperity. He is a stranger to anxiety, fear, and anger. Such a man is called a Muni. At the beginning of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we are still in Vishada Yoga, or the despondency of Arjuna. Arjuna is coming to Krishna with a lot of sorrow in his heart and tears in his eyes. Krishna spends most of this chapter talking to him about what is mortal and what is immortal in him, and lays out the Sankhya doctrine. Like a child who is crying and is appeased when he gets a toy, Arjuna, somewhat calmer after Krishna's exposition, asks several questions about the qualities of a self-governed sage, or in Sanskrit, sthita prajna. Krishna spends most of the remaining second chapter talking about the qualities of a sthita prajna. This is verse 56. And Arjuna hears from the great teacher that a self-governed sage has reached a point where troubles do not trouble him, and there is contentment and peace within him in good times. In other words, the pairs of opposites in life do not disturb his mental state. Bhavani Shankar, who was a devoted student of H.P. Blavatsky, gave a series of lectures on the Bhagavad Gita, talks about these verses, saying that the sage is beyond his causal body or karana sharira. Krishna adds, Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha, which translates as being devoid of anxiety, fear, and anger. Mr. William Quan Judge states it as, he is a stranger to anxiety, fear, and anger. These attributes of the lower mind plague our ordinary lives constantly. Anxiety and fear paralyze us and prevent us from thinking calmly. The same is true of anger. In addition, anger has a more deleterious effect on us. Judge, in his article called Culture of Concentration, states, when the student allows anger to arise, the influence of it is at once felt by the ethereal body and manifests itself in an uncontrollable trembling, which begins at the center and violently pulls apart the hitherto coherent particles. There is actually a destruction of the ethereal body which needs to be recreated slowly. The process is long and tedious, but once the mind has control over these three obstructions, then he is a self-governed sage or a muni. He has access to the mountaintop and attains a universal perspective. Thank you.
When in every condition he receives each event, whether favorable or unfavorable, with an equal mind which is neither likes nor dislikes, his wisdom is established, and having met good or evil, neither rejoices at the one nor is cast down by the other. I'd like you all to join me by taking a moment to simply rest, by closing your eyes and imagining a beautiful, clear blue sky, the bluest of blue. Imagine this filling all of space as far as the eye can see. In fact, it's so vast, this clear blue sky, that it feels as if it has no beginning nor end. Now imagine a magnificent sun set in the middle of this beautiful blue sky, its rays pouring out in all directions, illuminating all of space. Now the sun doesn't sit there illuminating one section of the sky and not the other. It doesn't have likes or dislikes or judging what part of the sky is good or bad. It has no preference. It just shines unceasingly outward because it's selfless. It's not self-centered. It's selfless, and its rays of light is a pure, selfless love intelligence, a pristine awareness that fills all of space. This sun is our true nature. Now, if the sun represents our true nature, let's now imagine that the sky is our mind. And as the clouds roll in, these clouds, they can be our thoughts and experiences arising. And as these clouds of thoughts are appearing in our mind, we begin to fixate on them. They obscure the light of the sun and the pristine awareness, our very connection to the ultimate nature of our being. Even the air we breathe grows cold, and thoughts turn into ice, and the forms we imagine take on patterns that harden into the relative forms of our physical world. And that's where the conceptual mind steps in. The conceptual mind is the part of us that labels or names things, the house, the car, the trees. It breaks things down, chops things up into colors, shapes, and sizes. It divides. And once the conceptual mind takes stage, we move away from our ultimate nature of pristine awareness. And by limiting ourselves to the conceptual mind, we chain ourselves to our suffering by grasping, fixating with our likes and dislikes, attaching to or aversion to the appearances of phenomena, and our hopes and fears as they arise. Now, at that point, we have a choice. We can get caught up in the conceptual mind with its judging, attachment, and aversions to suffering and fixating on our woes, or we can move beyond the conceptual mind, rising above the clouds where the sun shines to recognize and embrace our own ultimate nature that stays unchanged, no matter how many clouds obscure. If we can just take a moment to move into the stillness of the center of our hearts, we will remember and recognize who we really are. And at the same time, we will have the clarity, the wisdom, awareness of the true nature of not only ourselves, but the true nature of the phenomena that make up our reality. The key is that there is no inherent existence to this phenomena that is unceasingly arising before us. It's not that they don't exist, it's that they don't have inherent existence, no real form to them. It's our consciousness that gives it form, and our conceptual mind that grasps onto them, giving us the illusion that we experience. Knowing this gives us that true freedom from samsara. Always remember, all phenomena that we perceive naturally arises in its purest form. And as long as we don't grasp or attach to it by our likes and disliking, it will remain in its original purity, then dissolve and return to its original state of potentiality, all on its own. Thank you.
He is confirmed in spiritual knowledge when, like a tortoise, he can draw in all his senses and restrain them from their wanted purposes. The hungry man loses sight of every other object but the gratification of his appetite. And when he is become acquainted with Supreme, he loseth all taste for objects of whatever kind. This, I understand, refers to the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verses 58 and 59. The first keywords, confirmed in spiritual knowledge and acquainted with the Supreme, is what I would like to stop at first. This is just enlightenment, the purpose of life. The Supreme is the Self, transcendent, unbounded ocean of consciousness, self-sufficient, source, cause, and goal of the entire creation. This is big, and this is pure bliss, absorbing the entire awareness of those experiencing it as they've expressed it in the past, as some are expressing it today, in the present, or as others will in the future. Obviously, as a consequence of their many practices of evolution, we would say in general. But that explains why all the senses are drawn in like a tortoise. How to reach it, might we ask? Drawing the senses in forcefully and voluntarily would be too hard, if at all possible. Practices promoting the non-indulgence of senses have brought hardship and dullness in life to an extent that the younger generations have decided to turn their back on spiritual evolution. Really, the key is enlightenment. The self-governed sage, supremely fulfilled ready to assist the rest of humanity, according to his or her own dharma. Thank you.
The tumultuous senses and organs hurry away by force the heart, even of the wise man who striveth after perfection. Let a man, restraining all these, remain in devotion at rest in me, his true self. For he who hath his senses and organs in control possesses spiritual knowledge. The tremendous power of the senses and organs hurry away by force the heart. Mr. Judge reminds us of the central importance of the heart. It is the key to it all. The brain is only the servant of the heart, he said. We use an expression to describe the strength of our desires. We want something with all our heart. We are devoted to obtaining it. We know that we have higher and lower desires reflecting the dual aspect of kama manas, the desire mind, the fulcrum between our attraction to the pleasures of existence in a material form and our attractions to more intangible ideals. Our true desire may be subtle. Such is the force of personal desire that we may think that we are devoted to maintaining the health of the body, but in reality, we are devoted to the perfection of form, or vanity. Is there a force we may use to enable our hearts to overcome the snares of delusion? First, we must examine our heart's desires, those things to which we are devoted. As we know, the Gita is sometimes referred to as the book of devotion. Nearly every chapter takes up an aspect of devotion. There is devotion by means of faith, devotion by means of spiritual knowledge, and by means of spiritual discernment. There is devotion by means of the right performance of action, and devotion by means of renunciation of action. Are these the aspects of devotion to which we are committed? Or are we more devoted to money, power, fame, family? What is our intent or motive? What is in our heart when we seek to obtain that which we desire? Krishna admonishes us to remain in devotion at rest in me, the true self. When one is fixed immovably in contemplation, he will attain to devotion. Through contemplation, we may rest in the self that is behind all outward appearances, the unity that is the one self of all. Does this mean that by restraining our senses and organs for half an hour while we sit and concentrate upon the self, we may then go about our business in our usual fashion? Obviously not. This contemplation and devotion to the self means we must use the power of spiritual discernment to rigorously examine our motives in acting, to see the obvious ones and those that are more subtle. Is there the intent to benefit all, or the intent to benefit solely oneself? Mr. Judge suggests that we perform our duties with the intent to contribute to the welfare of all. Duty is the royal talisman, he said. Attention to duty requires skill in the performance of action. We must be able to put our whole heart into it. Let us imagine our heart as a garden. Our intentions are the seeds that will come to fruition in actions that reveal the true patterns of our thinking. If the fruits are not what we would wish, We may, by study, learn our motives and work to change our habitual, often unexamined thoughts. We can use the power of acting for and as the Supreme Self to see that our actions are in line with our higher aspirations. Our separative thoughts may be the only sacrifice we lay before the altar of our heart, described by HPB as holy and ever untrodden ground, invisible, intangible, unmentioned, save through the still small voice of our spiritual consciousness. Thank you.
He who attendeth to the inclination of the senses, in them hath a concern. For this concern is created passion. From passion, anger. From anger is produced delusion. From delusion, a loss of the memory. From the loss of memory, loss of discrimination. And from loss of discrimination, loss of all. Well, this intense passage follows well upon the other one just read, because it describes the person who, having just some inclination for sensual pleasure, money, power, fame, nevertheless, perhaps tries the spiritual path. And as the voice of the silence says, set not one soiled foot upon that ladder's lower rung, or the ladder will give way and overthrow thee. And this is a warning to all of us. If we have any inclination toward any of these passional desires, to deal with them first before we set out on this very profound and sacred path. Because what can happen, as according to the Sankhya doctrine, which chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita deals with, is the separation of Purusha from Prakriti and the higher and lower manas. Now, manas we know is one. However, the lower manas, when incarnated in the physical body, they can become heir to the senses. And of course, this is the blind king being controlled by his evil-minded son, Dhritarashtra, in the Mahabharata. And so what can happen is that a person beginning to fall into the inclination of senses, being concerned about this, having an affair or drinking alcohol, desiring money and more money, fame and more fame, power over others, either politically or simply in a home or work situation, it becomes very passionate. And of course, when these desires are not fulfilled, which they never will be fully, anger results. And then, of course, one begins to be deluded and lose it. One starts lying and even can become a pathological liar, not knowing one is lying, because one is deluded oneself and then forgetting how all of this has led to destruction in the past, losing discrimination, and then totally losing it. This person may wind up in a mental institution or a criminal, or somehow, worst of all, if one perhaps has developed some spiritual powers like this, a black magician, which can do great harm to others. So it is a great warning in the Gita. And we can look at a passage from Mr. Judge in an amazing pamphlet called The Powers of the Mind. where Judge says the mental characteristics belonging to lower manas are those which the higher manas, aided by the buddhi and atma, has to fight and conquer. Higher manas, if able to act, becomes what we sometimes call genius. If completely mastered, then one becomes a god. But memory continually presents pictures to lower manas, and the result is that the higher is obscured. Sometimes, however, along the pathway of life, we do see here and there men who are geniuses or great seers and prophets. In these, the higher powers of manas are active. In the person illumined, such were the great sages of the past, men like Buddha, Jesus, Confucius, Zoroaster, and others. So we can all become very great if we do not yield to these inclinations. And we can be a very great help to humanity by following the instructions of Krishna in the Gita. But we have to remember also the admonition of the voice of the silence. Look not behind, or thou art lost. Just like Lot's wife in the Bible, you don't look back at Sodom and Gomorrah. That is past, that is gone. Look forward to the light, and do not ever attend to the temptations, inclinations of the senses. And this will bring us eventual peace and harmony on the path. Thank you.
But he who, free from attachment or repulsion for objects, experiences them through the senses and organs, with his heart obedient to his will, attains to tranquility of thought. This brings to mind a quote that's in an article by HPB, a short quote, and she says, it's in the article Chelas and Lay Chelas, and she says, "There is no impossibility to him who wills." And it's interesting how they indicate in the Gita that if the will is obedient to the heart, that one can attain tranquility of thought. Seems seemingly to indicate that we can direct our will in different directions. And if the will is put in the wrong direction, it will bring the opposite of tranquility of thought. It will bring a lot of strife and a lot of suffering to the being. And and we look at desire and the various different effects that desire has upon the will, and vice versa, and all the various different desires that color the mind. And we see in Patanjali's, it talks about trying to attain a one-pointedness, and to try to break free from the coloring of the mind, the modifications that take place in the mind. And we can see how desire drives us towards all these various different things that make themselves present in the mind. And we, no sooner do we give them attention, they seem to take life, and they seem to grow and blossom into all sorts of beautiful flowers or weeds, things that are maybe not too so pretty to look at. So, and while this all seems to be going on, there's this constant, the winds of karma, it seems, are just flowing, always presenting different choices to us. And in the voice by H.P. Blavatsky, you see the idea where she presents that, you know, to live to benefit mankind is the first step. And that seems to indicate some sort of purity that must be attained, some sort of direction of the desire, some sort of a different intent than maybe what we're used to, maybe what we've been conditioned to. Because most of these desires, it seems, they're just, you know, they just conditionally seem to flood us, almost like it's normal. But Theosophy presents a different picture for us to look at. And then later in that book, in the voice, she indicates that, you know, the second step is to practice the paramitas, the virtues, and to try to understand and practice and to assimilate and to apply those to our actions, our thoughts, our motives. And then further in that book, she indicates that, you know, we try to attain a one-pointedness, while engaged in the practice of motive and the practice of the virtues, to try to align oneself with the master, with the masters, or with the higher self, however one wants to look at it, and to to try to take aim at that, to try to hit that target, to open oneself up to that awareness, to that relationship, to that understanding. And obviously this takes much practice, and we all try this at various different levels. And an interesting thing that comes from the Crest Jewel of Wisdom, or the Viveka Chudamani, where they talk about trying to attain the ability to be able to distinguish between what is seen and the seer. They use the symbology of, to look at it like a glass of water to a glass of milk. And we can see when we look at a glass of water, there's clarity, there's purity there. And if we try to see through a glass of milk, it's not so easy to do. There's lots of different life that's within the milk, lots of color, lots of shape, lots of different consistency. So once again, the crest jewel seems to indicate to try to build that skill, to try to distinguish that and to become well versed in that. And then later on in the instructions within that book, it seems to indicate that when one has attained that to some degree, once again to point oneself towards the divine being, the self, the master or the masters, and to try to hit that mark. And then they bring up the imagination, and it's interesting how the imagination is this thing that seems to always be able to present a multitude of things from the past or from the present or from the future, and to imitate all sorts of colors and shapes and sounds. And they indicate that in the crest, that to try to use that imagination, similar to what's said in the voice, actually, where she says to use one's thoughts or they will use you, and to try to act as or later at other places in the teachings where they talk about the masters, how they people their current, how they create a people their current with thoughts that are helpful to mankind, almost like a sunshine, to be able to shine like a sun and to emanate that. And so back to the crest, and the crest talks about you know, trying to hit that mark of the divine self, of the real self, the eternal. And another little suggestion that's put forth there is to try to assimilate that no separateness between the non-eternal and the eternal, that all things are that self, all things are the eternal, even though there's an aspect of it that is temporary, an aspect that is constantly moving and changing and throwing us off course and challenging us and tempting us at so many different levels, and to try to purify all of that. And so I believe that's what it when it's indicating that to be able to make one's heart obedient to that will, and while in the body, but not another quote, I think it's of Judges, where he says, you know, to be in the world but not of it, you know, not to try to escape karma, not to try to you know, to manipulate karma, but to embrace it and use it, as Mr. Crosby points in many places, you know, to see it as a cult opportunity, a daily opportunity to fine-tune oneself, to know if one is patient. How is one going to know if one's patient if they're not tested, or calm, or charitable and giving? Only when we're put to the pinch, put to the test. So, and then it seems like it's at the end of that quote there, if one is able to attain to that in any way, in any small degree, there will be some sort of tranquility of thought, little by little, to the point of where we become masters ourselves, become you know, great adepts with vast wisdom and vast knowledge and vast compassion. So that is all I have to share. Thank you.
And this tranquil state attained, therefrom shall soon result a separation from all troubles. And his mind being thus at ease, fixed upon one object, it embraceth wisdom from all sides. In the notes on the Bhagavad Gita, William Quan Judge starts with the sentence, "A mighty spirit moves through the pages of the Bhagavad Gita." Right at the beginning, we see the mighty spirit of this little book. The second chapter is dense and filled with so much information. In fact, apart from the last chapter, the 18th chapter, this has more than 70 verses and is one of the longest. It is important to note that when Arjuna asks the question about the deportment and qualities of a self-governed sage, 15 verses are devoted to explaining, repeating, and elaborating about the Sthita Prajna, or the self-governed sage. Which brings me to think and ponder that this book, written so long ago, just like Homer's Odyssey, is that both probably started as an oral tradition. So when we look at this verse, which is verse 65, it starts with the tranquil state that was already mentioned in the previous verse. In the Dhammapada, Canto 25, talking about the bhikkhu, again, a self-governed sage, it says, the bhikkhu who is calm in body, calm in speech, calm in mind, who is firm, who has thrown out the baits of the world, is named the tranquil one. What a beautiful rendition of the same idea in the Dhammapada. Just like the bhikkhu, the mind is at ease, fixed on one object, as was mentioned in the earlier. And William Kwan Judge in Patanjali calls this one-pointedness in Sanskrit, ekagrata. I shall end my presentation with a story related by Damodar Mavalankar about the phrase, fixed on one object. He was a student of Theosophy who became a mystic and joined the Lodge of the Masters. He wrote this in 5 years of Theosophy under the article called Contemplation. So here's the story. King Janaka was considered to be a Raja Rishi, a royal sage. He had his detractors. Some of his detractors could not understand how he could govern his kingdom and still be a Raja Rishi. So King Janaka decided to perform a test with them. He made them carry pots filled to the brim with water on a busy street where there were beautiful, voluptuous dancing and singing girls. The detractors were told that their heads were on the line if they spilled even a drop of water. So they all went and accomplished the task with great precision. When King Janaka asked them, "What did you see in the streets?" their answers were unanimous. "We were so busy concentrating on our pots of water. How could we see anything?" Tranquility, all connection with the lower mind and the senses has been erased and eased. And ekagrata leads to illumination of the buddhi, self-conscious Godhood. Thank you.
The man whose heart and mind are not at rest is without wisdom or the power of contemplation. Who doth not practice reflection hath no calm. And how can a man without calm obtain happiness? What this passage tells us is that there's a direct connection between inner calmness, reflection, contemplation, and the ability to experience clarity, wisdom, and happiness. True happiness will remain elusive if one's mind is in a constant state of unrest. A calm and reflective mind is essential for the attainment of wisdom. A restless heart and a restless mind signify that there is inner turmoil, anxiety, or a lack of peace existing within. If inner turmoil can be seen as an active rajasic state, full of heat and motion, reflection and contemplation are sattvic, cool, compassionate, and detached. Think of a lake perfectly reflecting its surroundings. If reflection and contemplation are necessary to make calm and insightful connections, and to produce an understanding of the components of our experiences, then without reflection and contemplation, wisdom cannot blossom. A restless state of mind hinders intellectual and reflective capacities, and those parts of the brain involved in thought and reflection, like the frontal cortex, actually switch off, shunting energy to the restless and rajasic limbic system. Compare the 5 capabilities of the limbic system: freeze, flop, friend, fight, or flight, with the 5 capabilities of the frontal cortex: reasoning and comprehension, problem solving, impulse control, creativity, and perseverance. The ability to make sound judgments and decisions results from deep thought and calm reflection. Contemplation and reflection also involve introspection, questioning, and thoughtful consideration of one's experiences. Without this practice, one will not be able to gather the fruits of experience. Reflection and contemplation leads us to clarity, wisdom, and happiness. Reflection is a deliberate and conscious effort to gain insight, to learn from past experiences, and make sense of our world. The foundation of reflection is self-awareness. It's about being conscious of your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. One component of reflection is critical thinking, and it involves analyzing and evaluating information, experiences, and ideas, where you consider the significance and implications of the events in your life. Open-mindedness is also crucial to reflection. This means being willing to consider different perspectives, challenging your own assumptions, and being receptive to new ideas. Reflection often involves asking yourself questions. These questions can vary on the context, but they typically aim to encourage deeper thinking. Examples might include, what did I learn from this experience? How did I feel at the time, and how do I feel now? What worked well? What could be improved? And what would I do differently in a similar situation? Reflection is not only about looking back, but also about looking forward. Setting goals based on your reflections can help guide your future actions. It's being proactive, not passive. Reflection and contemplation often require time and patience. It's not a rushed process. Taking the time to reflect allows for a more thorough examination of experiences and promotes a deeper understanding of oneself and one's surroundings. Reflection and contemplation become the most effective when they become a regular part of a routine. Integrating moments of reflection into daily life helps build a habit of mindful thinking and contributes to ongoing growth. Reflection and contemplation are a multifaceted process that involves self-awareness, critical thinking, open-mindedness, and a deliberate effort to learn from experience. They're valuable tools for fostering a deeper understanding of oneself and the world, and will lead to clarity, wisdom, and happiness. Thank you.
The uncontrolled heart, following the dictates of the moving passions, snatcheth away the spiritual knowledge. As the storm, the bark upon the raging ocean. And therefore, O great armed one, he is possessed of spiritual knowledge, whose senses are withheld from the objects of sense. These beautiful passages have been recited by many throughout centuries and translated by notable people, such as the Gandhi, which was originally in Gujarati and then later translated into English by Mahadev Desai, and Swami Swarupananda of the Advaita Ashram, a follower of Vivekananda, who is in the Himalayas at the Himalayan Institute. Gandhi's translation went, for when the mind runs after any of the roaming senses, it sweeps away understanding as a wind a vessel upon the waters. Therefore, O Mahabhahu, he whose senses are reined on all sides from their objects is a man of secure understanding. And the Swami says, for the mind which follows in the wake of the wandering senses carries away his discrimination, as a wind carries away a boat on the waters. Therefore, mighty arm, his knowledge is steady, whose senses are completely restrained from sense objects. So they are all telling about the same thing. And Arjuna, as we all know, seemed paralyzed at the start of the war by the very thought of fighting his mentors, his elders, and his cousins. Krishna needed to bring him back into reality, the reality of the situation, as the commander of his forces, as he stood face to face with the armies of the very people who had forced him and his family into wrongful exile and now stood ready to vanquish them. It is clear from these passages that the writer of the Gita, Vedavyasa, seems to be telling us all, by the way of Krishna's advice to Arjuna, that one should control one's emotions and act with prudence and discretion, unaffected and unbiased by the grasp of desires or emotional pulls of the moment. His advice is thus to always act in an objective manner, in accordance with the needs of the situation. One should heed one's head and not one's heart in a moment of crisis. Most of us often are overcome by our passions and our emotions. Krishna warns that these would lead to ruin. Be mindful at all times, with discretion and thoughtfulness of the results of your action. Thank you.
Shloka 69. Ya nisha sarva bhutana tasyam jagarti samyami yasyam jagrati bhutani sa nisha pashyato munehe. What is night to those who are unenlightened is as day to his gaze. What seems as day is known to him as night, the night of ignorance. Such is the self-governed sage. In order to become the self-governed sage, one has to first know the self. The self cannot be known by the Vedas, nor by the understanding, nor by much learning. So he whom the self chooses, by him alone can the self be gained. The self chooses him as his own, but the man who has not first turned aside from his wickedness, who is not calm and subdued, or whose mind is not at rest, he can never obtain self even by knowledge. So when one is calm, subdued, with mind at rest, and based on the wisdom about the true nature of oneself and the reality, there is discernment between the temporary and the permanent. Then there is complete surrender to the higher self, known as Ishvara Paridhana and Atma Nivedan. And then there is sincere desire to be guided, ruled, and assisted by the higher self. to suffer and to enjoy whatever the higher self has in store for one by way of discipline and experience. Then there is complete subjugation to the higher self, to the effect where the pilgrim says, "Not my will, but thine will be done." Then and only then the mind is completely absorbed, always in the bliss of the self. Such a person is known as Sthita Prajna. And this leads to inner equanimity. He is considered as one of perfectly poised discernment and remains asleep towards the sense objects, while he is ever awake to the state of the Supreme, towards which all other beings remain asleep. Thus he becomes a self-governed sage. Next, please. Apurnyaman machala pratishtham samudramapah pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sashanti mapnoti na kama kama. The man whose desires enter his heart as waters run into the unswelling passive ocean, which though ever fall, yet does not quit its bed, obtaineth happiness, not he who lusteth in his lusts. There is one more quality of knowing such a person. Like even though all the rivers get flooded and fall into the ocean, yet the ocean never swells in volume, nor transgresses its limits, nor in the summer, even when the river gets dry, and yet the ocean never gets reduced in volume. In the same manner, the mind of the Sthita Prajna does not get agitated by the advent of success and glory or desires and lust. He takes no cognizance of either the coming or going of these, but remains firm, undisturbed in the bliss of the self. He attaches no importance for the worldly glory or happiness, nor even cares for nirvana or heavenly bliss. He has killed his personality, dropped all egoism, renounced all desires. And how does he achieve this? WQJ says, such attitude of mind must be attained as will enable one to look into the realities of the things. The mind must escape from the mere formalities and conventions of life. Even though outwardly one seems to obey all of them and should be firmly established on truth. Which truth? The truth that man is the copy of the universe and has in himself a portion of the Supreme Being. And to the extent this is realized will be the clearness of the perception of truth. A realization of this leads inevitably to the conclusion that all other men and beings are united with us. And this removes egotism, which is the result of the notion of separateness. Once this attitude is achieved, then he abides in the great bliss of the oneness, in the universal life, is completely united, and is in harmony with all. Thank you.
The man who, having abandoned all desires, acts without covetousness, selfishness, or pride, deeming himself neither actor nor possessor, attains to rest. Today has been very helpful as a student to be able to participate in this event, and so I give thanks to the students that have put it together and participated in it. And it's very helpful to contemplate these ideas while practicing listening to others, and also figuring out what one is going to say when it's their turn. So so thanks for that. This quote here it makes me think of what is said in the Voice, in the very first couple pages of the Voice, where she indicates that a couple different things. She indicates first how the situation that's going on in the mind, and the position that that the practitioner, the disciple, the student must take, and in regards to the mind. And then of course she quotes the whole idea of the mind being that thought producer, and one must and slaying the real within us, and stealing away the true reality, in a sense. And as students, we are to try to address that within ourselves, to become the slayer of that, to understand the mind. And then she indicates something very interesting, which where it reminded me of this quote, and the one in the Gita here, of how does one become the actor, and while in rest, and be able to have tranquility, to be able to have a centeredness. And she seems to indicate there that we, to try to reach the ability to look at one's form, to look at one's self, their personal self, in the way that we do as we see ourselves in dreams, to try to understand life in not so much a concrete way, to be able to seize through some of the unrealities of the concrete waking consciousness, the physical existence, and to see that there could be a subtlety to it, a non-concreteness to it, something that our senses tell us otherwise. They seem to indicate that things are solid and things are separate. And then she addresses the idea of trying to discern the one, of taking that inner sound, and having the inner sound kill out all the outer, all the sounds that are around us, the sounds that are in the room right now, the sounds that are floating through our minds, the multifaceted colors and sounds that take place within our minds, and also externally, to try to blend that into something of that is more real, and is indicating just that. She goes, when to himself his form appears unreal, as do on waking all the forms he sees in dreams. When he has ceased to hear the many, he may discern the one, the inner sound which kills the outer. Then only, not till then, shall he forsake the region of Asat, the false, to come unto the realm of Sat, the true. And it's interesting how we have to try to attain all these. Of course, there's, I guess, sitting meditation, which is, I guess, maybe more popular than, say, lifelong meditation or constant meditation. And so, but in reference to like the lifelong meditation, to while acting, while kind of being observant and discriminating of the sensory nature that's taking place, like even right now within us, and to try to reach some sort of reality, a true sense of that, to see through the falseness of that, which kind of goes back to what I spoke of before with the will, because obviously that takes a lot of effort, a lot of will. Takes a lot of determination and focus and trial and attempts to do so, and many failures, of course. And as indicated in Theosophy, nothing like that is going to come to one quickly or easily. It's going to be, it's going to, and it has been beyond our present personalities. Theosophy indicates that's why we're in the position we are now, and then in the future also, that it's not a one life type of manifestation or attempt. It's no small feat. I think Blavatsky says it in places where she says, the man that attempts to attain to that is much greater than the man that will climb the Himalayas, even though how hard that would be on a physical level to attain that feat of climbing a great mountain, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. Much more so, apparently, in for one to try to step upon the path of the masters and to try to attain in some degree what is seemed to be indicated within our teachings of what is possible within humanity. So I think I just want to quickly go over didn't have my, oh yeah, so 1 second here. Oh, no, I guess that's all I have to share on that. So thank you again, and yeah, that's it.
This, O son of Pritha, is dependence upon the Supreme Spirit, and he who possesseth it goes no more astray. Having obtained it, if therein established at the hour of death, he passes on to nirvana in the Supreme. So these closing words of only the 2nd chapter of the Gita show how the work will unfold like flower from within without. I'm really honored to be asked to do a summary of even half of 1 chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, especially after hearing such wonderful commentaries by fellow students who have explained so much and given us so much to consider and think about. We might try to put the Bhagavad Gita in a little bit of context. It's been called the Song Celestial. In modern theosophical terms, we might call it the Theosophia of ancient India, what the Hindus themselves called Sanatana Dharma, the eternal Dharma, the eternal religion. Now, as was indicated, the Gita is only a small portion of the Mahabharata. I believe it's about 700 verses. And the Mahabharata contains, as the largest epic poem in the world, about 100,000 verses. The Gita represents the keynote to the spiritual impulse needed as humanity entered the Kali Yuga, the dark age, the age of ignorance, but also the age of opportunity. And in that dark age, humanity has never been left without friends. The Gita is but one of many sacred texts meant to inspire, guide, and enlighten humanity over centuries, now over millennia. Works such as this and others that were mentioned, the Dhammapada, the Tao Te Ching, the works of Shankara, Plato, Pythagoras, the lives of Buddha and Jesus, countless others, all were brought into focus by the modern Theosophical movement inaugurated over 100 years ago by H.P. Blavatsky and William Q. Judge. It's why we celebrate Great Teachers' Day. It's the date of the founding of that movement with the formation of the Theosophical Society in 1875. All these figures stand out as beacons of light in a dark world, and they always point to the essential spiritual nature of man and the existence of a path of perfection accessible to anyone willing to make the effort. HPB wrote, "Follow not me nor my path. Follow the path that I show the masters who are behind." And she was only but echoing the words of Jesus, the gentle sage of Galilee, 2,000 years ago, who reportedly said, "Greater works than these ye shall do." So the path shows us, we are all potentially self-governed sages. In one of the translations of the Gita by Charles Johnston, the phrase self-governed sage is rendered silent seer. And I think it's a wonderful complement to that phrase, self-governed sage. These teachers, great as they all point out they are not unique phenomena. They are not creations of a personal God, nor are they freaks of nature, accidents of chance, something to be repeated, if at all, only by flukes of biology. No, they represent the heart of the universe, the heart of potentiality for all life. What is the path that they indicate? Now, how did these sages, we could ask ourselves, how could they become self-governed? And therefore, how can we also become self-governed? We could ask, like Plato did, what would a self-governed community look like? A self-governed country, a self-governed world. In a republic, Plato proposes that to have a good state, we have to start with good individuals. That is, at least a few self-governed individuals. Where do we start? Well, we only can start where we are, with an internal recognition that, at least in principle, there are universal values we can grasp. These are not things outside of our realm. They're not things that we can't understand. They're things we can begin to glimpse and then try to follow up with as practical an application as possible. Even if those principles are only suspected, we can start to act as if these ideals and ideas are real. So, several students have put the second chapter, really, first two chapters of the Gita in perspective, where the pupil, Arjuna, is a kind of everyman. He's us. He's looks over the battlefield of his life, and he doesn't like what he sees. It's not a superficial despondency. He is done. He sits down in the chariot and basically tells Krishna, "What do I do?" Krishna tells him, "Do your duty. Right in front of you, you know how to do it." And he very briefly appeals to his ego. He says, "What would it look like if you didn't do your duty? You know, all those warriors would just laugh at you." Well, he doesn't go very far with that idea, but he says it enough to get Arjuna's attention. And then he basically tells him, look, we're all immortal. I, Krishna, can remember my past lives. But you, Arjuna, you've forgotten yours. You need to begin to rule yourself from within based on what is real, not from what is without, which is always transitory. Now, this early in the Gita, 16 chapters yet to go, Krishna obviously can't tell Arjuna everything. So that's what he does tell him, what he can, that there is something real in you and in us. So go ahead, do what you need to do. Don't become attached to the results. Now, the balance between those two, the real and the non-attachment, he calls equal-mindedness or yoga. So a balanced mind leads to right knowledge, and right knowledge to right action. He calls it karma yoga, concentration while engaged in action. So what prevents full devotion? What prevents that focus? Very simple. Desire. The things we want, the things we don't like, we're attached to, everything that we think we want, everything we used to want, things we will want in the future. But Krishna says that the highest ideal is only attained by a few, but everyone can attempt it, regardless of where we think we are or who we think we ought to be. There's something timeless about our motives. So if we're suddenly confronted by what we are, not just by what we've done in the past. So with right motive, we can become better performers of action. How? Krishna has one word for it: devotion. It clears the mind and soul of the clouds of sense. I love the analogy given earlier about the sky. It's the same kind of idea. The clouds shroud our vision. Devotion to the highest that we can find in ourselves and in the world, plus learning about what's real and what's not real, will lead us on the path toward wisdom. So we need devotion, faith in that highest, and right action. Neither is sufficient in itself, but both are needed to make a whole. Now, why does that work? Because by doing so, we enter that path outlined by all the great teachers. You know, Krishna is something of a reformer. He's actually more than something. He is a reformer. He's an iconoclast. And he says that, all the worship of the Vedas, all the things that we do outward sacrifices for, rituals and so forth, they'll give results. Those results are temporary. And the wheel of life still goes on because there's unspent, delayed karma from our past and present actions that will wait for us. So attachment to those actions, attachment to those senses assures rebirth over and over again. That's why at the very end of this second chapter, Krishna says, if you establish this at the hour of death, that is, make it the sounding note, the keynote of your life, and you pass on to nirvana in the supreme. Another translation puts it, instead of nirvana in the supreme, calls it union with the eternal. It's what H.P. Blavatsky talks about in The Voice of the Silence. In order to become the knower of all self, thou hast first of self to be the knower. That's really the message of the rest of the Gita, only hinted out in a way in seed form, in outline form in this chapter, but it's waiting, like the message of all the great teachers, for us to listen and to apply for ourselves. It's that old small path to self-knowledge which all of us can follow if we make the effort. That is the path of the self-governed sage, the silent seer. Thank you.